listening to Tales from the Tackle Shop. My name's Andy Page, and as always, my co-host is that man who will never be beaten, Alex Bates. Evening, Alex, you're there somewhere.
Hi, mate. Yeah, I'm here. Are you right?
Yeah, I haven't seen you in ages now.
No, I ain't seen anyone in ages. I've only seen the postwoman and bloke behind the counter the last 3 weeks or whatever it is, 2 weeks. I don't know what day of the week it is, to be honest. But
no, we lost we lost a day
been
midweek.
manic.
So you've been all right because you've been in isolation now for 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks, isn't it? 2 weeks tomorrow, isn't it? So yeah, it's a bit weird. Every day seems like Groundhog Day. Get up, put the computer on, and pass a load of parcels up, take some telephone calls, and then go to the post office, come back and update online, and then go to bed and just repeat. So
it is, isn't it? It's crazy at the minute, but at least you're being very proactive.
I'm not moaning. So yeah, I mean, if anyone thinks, "Oh, Alex has been quiet, he ain't rung me," I've just been flat out concentrating on getting orders, packing them, or picking them, packing them, getting to the post office as quick as I can. But I mean, some orders are going really quick. Some are getting them next day. Some are taking 6 days to come. So I think people just got to be a little bit patient. It's quite frustrating, really, when, you know, I'm here on the job all the time and you're getting orders out the way quick, but the Royal Mail just can't cope in some areas. So people just got to have a bit of understanding, I think.
Yeah, we're a very strange time. So what you're doing, basically, you took yourself off to Rookery Waters, didn't you? And kind of you shut down the fishery. The tackle shop is shut, but you're still doing eBay and online orders.
Yeah.
And it'll be fair to say that you've been very busy. Yeah,
it's been a lot busier than I thought, which has been brilliant. And, you know, thanks for the people that have sort of supported me and rung me up and given me plenty of orders to get through. Certain stock has gone quicker than the toilet rolls. And whether I can get some more back in stock is a different matter, because obviously the manufacturers are all shut now. But we'll see. I'll do my best. If they're going in for a day or two or whatever, I'll try and get as many orders as I can, and keep everyone in hooks, line and floats and elastics and terminal tackle, basically. So
that's all. It sounds like the half of the match fishing scene in Fenland is busy tying rigs and.
Well, that's all you can do, isn't it? You know, I mean, we spend hours and hours of prep anyway, but people are going to get it all done now. I mean, some of our team are prepping already for the Winter League next year with hooks, lines, not so much elastics, because there's no point putting them in and they deteriorate. But just thinking ahead of the game and planning and, well, getting your kit sorted. You can't really plan for when you're going to go fishing next, because we just don't know. But just having something to look forward to more than anything, I think, keeps you keeps your head strong. So,
hey, exactly right. I mean, I've been sitting there. I've got my second batch of pipe flies that I'm tying up. I experimented with a few. I've gone back to basics, and it's great, because now I'll probably miss my pipe fly fishing window for this year. But at least it means next year I've got loads of flies that I know work, and I won't have to spend any time next year tying them, because I've done all the prep. And also, like lots of anglers, I've really tidied up all my gear. So I've got all those little jobs that I hadn't done. I've got most things sorted now. I've just got 1 or 2 electronic things to get sorted, and I'll be ahead of the game. So when we can get out there again, it's like you said, the good anglers will be on the ball, ready to go, and nothing will be holding us back. So, yeah, it's good to get organised, and also it's awesome that you've done what you've done and got yourself planned, and you've kept yourself busy, because it puts tackle and baits in a really strong position, I believe, when we come out of this.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, obviously, when with stock levels and things like that, I can only sell what I've got. When I run out at the minute, that's it. I've run out of it, but there's a positive to it. I can get stock that, hasn't been particularly selling brilliantly or is sort of outdated a bit now. I can get that, sell it a little bit cheaper, and turn money back into new stock when they're all operational again. Obviously, bait and things like that, I'm absolutely rammed. You can't fit any more pellets, corn, boilies, pop-ups, glugs, dips. They're all stocked up because just this time of year now is when all the new baits come out. So you can imagine the bait shelves are absolutely rammed. But it's almost small, nicky-nacky bits, your terminal tackle bits, pole float silicon, for example. Probably 2 months ago, I thought, why on earth have I got so much pole float silicon? But now I'm, nearly sold out of all of it. So it's, I've got bits and bobs left, don't get me wrong, because I do keep quite a lot in stock. But when people are sort of buying 10 packs of 16s, 10 packs of 18s, it doesn't take long to clear you out. So, yeah. I'm not moaning. Put it that way.
And we'll just say before I press the record button that we both think that once the lockdown's lifted, we think it's going to be people are going to be out and want to go fishing hard. So you'll get that stock of ground bait and pellets are soon going to diminish as well once we can get out and about. Yeah. Okay, Alex, we're going to have a little chat in a few minutes after. Well, probably in a couple of hours, depending on how long Eric has been. But first of all, we had Jamie Cook on last week, the CEO from the Angling Trust. Obviously, I couldn't really get in touch with you because you've been in isolation. It was very busy getting in touch with you because you're just flat out. But that was quite an interesting podcast with Jamie, and it showed me how busy this guy is, because it took me 2 weeks to literally get that recording done. I'd had him on the phone the day before just to run through a few things, and he got called away to deal with all sorts of other more important issues than speaking to me on the phone. And it just shows how this pandemic has hit lots of different things that you would not have thought it would have hit. But angling has taken a big hit with this because people are still trying to get out and about and being very selfish. Anyway, that was last week, and this week I called upon a friend to do us a favour, and Eric Edwards is our guest this week, and Eric is a legendary predator pike angler, and I've had the privilege of getting to know Eric really quite well over the last couple of years, and he is just a true gentleman, and he loves fishing, and he's so knowledgeable of fishing. I think this week's guest will be an absolute winner with everybody listening. It's not just pike fishing. Eric's got a whole range of knowledge in all different aspects of the sport, and really what he doesn't know isn't worth knowing. So Alex, if you don't mind, I think we'll go straight into the Eric Edwards discussion, and we'll have a chat at the end. COVID-19 can't beat us. We have got the predator angler of all predator anglers. He's going to hate me saying that. I've also got him on WhatsApp so I can see his facial expressions. But joining us this week on the podcast is Eric Edwards. Eric, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, Andy. Nice to be here.
Perfect.
I'm actually in my living room, so it is nice to be here.
Yeah, and I'm in my man cave. Just going to give listeners a very brief intro to Eric. If predator anglers and pike anglers will know exactly who Eric Edwards is, but to those lesser mortals that dangle maggots and do all sorts of strange things, you may not be so quite well briefed. Eric is currently chairing and I must get this bit right, the Angling Trust Freshwater Specialist Advice Group. He has been a member of Team England and assistant manager of Team England, the World Lure Championship team. And he'll hate me saying this, but he is of Bliffield fame of catching 2 incredibly large pike. In fact, at the time, and probably only beaten by a couple of chew fish, if I'm thinking right, you've got the biggest brace ever in the UK, Eric.
Well, it depends on what you call a brace. If you're talking about fish caught on the same day, then there hasn't been a bigger brace from chew, or certainly or anywhere in Britain. I understand that there may have been a bigger brace from a place in Sweden, but I've never really had the SP on that. I don't know if it's accurate or not. But yeah, for my sins, I caught a couple of big pike.
You did, yeah. We'll touch on Bliffield for definite later on, and I know you don't like me going on about it, but I love it. I might drop in the weights just for the ordinary maggot drowners to hear how massive they were. Right, now, I've known Eric for a couple of years now, but I've first knew of you, Eric. This must have been 10-15 years ago. You did a pike anglers talk at the British Legion at Bottisham, and at the time I was transfixed listening to you, and I sat there listening to this guy who's caught these monstrous fish, That was one thing that struck in my mind, but also how ingenious you are with different types of things that you think about. Now, at the time, if I remember correctly, you were experimenting with a planer board. Do you remember this?
Well, yeah. Well, of course, planer boards are commonly used, particularly on the continent and in America. And they're usually used to drag a lure behind the boat, but without it being directly behind the boat. A planer board basically planes out some distance from the boat, and you drag the lure behind that. I thought to myself, this could be used for other things. And I started off on my local canal using a floatfish live bait and using the planer board to fish the live bait out from the bank. You can't keep still while you're doing this. You've got to walk. So I used to walk along the canal, pulling the planer board with the floatfish live bait some yards behind, and that was pretty effective. But then a while later, I thought to myself, well, hang on, why am I using two different things here? I've got a planer board clipped onto the line, and I've got a float some yards behind it. Why can't I just incorporate the float into the planer board or the planer board into the float? So I was actually sat on the River Severn one day, and this thought struck me that I could somehow make a planer float. And I had some bits and bobs in my tackle bag, and one of the things I had was a drifter, a drift float, which you'd use to take your bait out on the wind. And I had a few bits of wire and a drifter stem and some polyballs. So I sat there on the bank and bent these bits of wire into shape and used a bit of sellotape and fastened it all together.
Sellotape.
Well, it wasn't. It was insulated.
Yeah.
And fastened everything together and lobbed it out into the river. And of course, it swung into the bank and didn't work at all. So I reeled it in again and just made a few subtle changes and got the angle right on the vein. And there has to be a second stem comes off the main stem. It's a bit complicated. It'd be easy with a diagram, but we haven't got that luxury. And I put on a live bait, cast this thing out downstream, and I was astonished to see it go upstream. So on a tight line, this float actually planed upstream.
It swung round with tension.
It swung round till it was almost level with me.
Wow.
And then it hung in the current. I thought, crikey, this actually works. So then I fed out a little bit of line, and of course it went across the river. And on the far bank there was a tree, an overhanging tree. I thought, if I could get my live bait under that overhanging tree, there's probably a pike there. Sure enough, I worked the live bait out under the tree. The float plopped under, and I brought in a 15-pound pike. I thought, crikey, this is something. So I adapted that for use on rivers. I adapted it for use on my local canal, walking along the bank again. On the local canal, it was quite useful because the far bank of the canal is always lined with boats. And I could walk along the canal, plane the bait out to this line of boats, and I could literally scrape the planer float along the hulls of these boats. And any pike that was sitting underneath the boats just came out and grabbed it. Very, very effective. And I did this for a couple of years, and I advertised it because I don't tend to keep things to myself. I let people know because if for no other reason, other people usually come out with a refinement, a better idea than mine. That's and right, I then pinch that, which is fair enough. And then I discovered, after using this method for some years, that it was against the law. It's actually illegal in this country to use a planer board or similar item because it's regarded as an illegal instrument under the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Act.
Is it really?
It is. Planer boards and planer floats are not allowed in this country. I was using them in all innocence. I didn't know. Yeah. My local Environment Agency enforcement officer, he's a good friend, actually. He's a nice guy, and I get on with him. But when I've mentioned the fact that I was thinking of using a planer board, he got his job's worth hat on and said, well, if you do, I will report you. And he wasn't kidding.
I never knew you couldn't use it. a planer board.
The Environment Agency have got themselves into a bit of a hole with it. The problem is it was made illegal in the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Act because people were using what they called otter boards, which are the same thing, to hold a lure or a baited hook stationary over a salmon line. And they would pin this to a tree or to the floor, leave the otter board there, go away, come back the next day and find a salmon had hung itself on it.
Right.
So they were made illegal. Unfortunately, pike anglers and other predator anglers have found a perfectly legitimate use for these, but because they were made illegal in primary legislation, it would actually take an act of parliament to make them legal again. And the Environment Agency have said that they know that they've got a problem because a lot of lure companies are advertising these things and selling them in this country. And they would like to change things subtly. They can't change the law without an act of parliament, but they can. Oh, what's the phrase? They can make a statement of intent, I think it's called, whereby the item remains illegal, but the Environment Agency have stated they will not prosecute. But they haven't done that as yet, so it remains illegal, and you can be prosecuted for using a planer board in Britain.
Wow, never knew that. Because obviously in the States, for example, they use them a lot for the musky fishing. They must get the baits 50, 60 yards out from the side of the boats. It's incredible the distance they can cover. Yeah.
I know on the continent they use great big ones, and they'll string several rods off the same planer board, off the line. Yeah. But if you were caught doing it in this country, you could be prosecuted. I do know of someone who uses a planer board routinely in the lakes, and it has been challenged by the Environment Agency. When the officer realised that he's not using it to catch salmon, he's only using it to catch pike, and in a legitimate fashion, he hasn't prosecuted him, and in fact he's allowed him to carry on.
Yeah. I was going to say...
So the officers are being sensible.
Yeah, exactly, that's common sense. But most of the waters anyway over here, it's only on the big waters where it's an advantage, isn't it, really?
I'm not sure that's true. One of the great things about using a planer board, if you're actually trolling, is that it gets the lure off away from the side of the boat, from behind the boat. And if you're in a shallow area and there's a danger of the boat spooking the fish, then having the lure running to the side of the boat is an advantage.
Yeah, so I'll take that point. It's just I was just thinking drains, fishing the drains in my head. There's only one or two drains where it's wide enough to be, useful. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Anyway, the float does the float still exist somewhere in the Edwards Armoury? Have you still got it?
Do you know, in this Corona outbreak, I've done something I've been threatening to do for years. Tidied my tackle room up, and I found a couple of old versions of the float kicking around, but I haven't used them for a few years now.
Oh, that's good. Because going back to that talk, you also were showing us how to make the titanium wired traditional snap tracers, but using parts that you could change and how you could change the hooks. And I went away from there thinking, that's brilliant. And I think you did a YouTube video, or someone videoed you making them, and I then copied it to the letter. You don't know I did this. I don't think I ever told you. And to this day, if I'm using my titanium tracers, they're still on your original design, where you used a sea fishing boom and you got a sleeve and you hooked a second part over in the hook. Do you remember?
That's right. I switched over to titanium traces many years ago. Now, a lot of people won't switch because the titanium wire costs a fortune. It probably costs about at least five times as much as stainless wire. But the advantage of using titanium is that when you get a fish, it doesn't kink the trace. The trace always springs back into shape. And in actual fact, you've got to try very hard indeed to kink a titanium trace. It's such springy material, it just springs back into shape. The downside of that is, of course, because it springs back into shape, it's not possible to twist it in the way that you would a steel trace. So when I used to use steel traces, I was never a crimper. I was always a twister, or a twiddler, as some people call it. Yeah. I would always twist my traces. You can't do it with titanium. You have to use crimps.
Yeah.
Now, you can get away with single crimps if you do it carefully, but probably the most efficient way of crimping titanium, that is titanium 7-strand, is to use double barrel crimps. And you've got to have a specialist cup-to-cup crimping tool to use the double barrel crimps. If people are thinking of switching to titanium, and I do recommend it, I think it's very good stuff, then you need to use the right crimps, and you've got to put the titanium wire through the crimp 3 times.
That's right, yeah.
It's got to go through, back, and through again,
yeah.
And then be crimped. If you try and crimp it just through twice, it will slip out. Now, the great difference this has made a number of differences to my deadbait fishing. Firstly, I don't have to go out with a lot of trace making materials. I just go out with a few traces, safe in the knowledge that my traces are not going to become destroyed by the first pike catch. But also, do you still use those tubes for rolling your traces around?
Yes.
Right. I've completely gone away from that. There's no need for it.
Yeah.
They're great big bulky things. And I use a flat pack. And I just put my traces, usually I have my traces made up, and wrap them a couple of rounds inside one of these, I think they're carp hook length holders, something like that. And you can have it flat, and it sits in your bag a lot better, and it's a lot lighter.
Do you know what, Eric? Over the years, I've gone to this system of just in little packets. Then I went back to the rig bins. Then I went back to packets. I've gone back to rig bins again. I keep changing my mind about everything all the time. I just keep thinking...
I just find the bins bulky in your bag.
Yeah.
That's all. Anyway, what you were alluding to is the fact that my traces are modular.
That's right. Yeah.
So basically, my titanium trace, I use a single piece of titanium, which is probably about 15 inches in length, and that's my upper part.
Yep.
And then using a series of clips and split rings, I attach the second part of the trace along with the hook. So at the bottom of my main trace length, I would have the top hook. I would then attach by means of a split ring, I would attach the second short trace, which might only be 3 to 4 inches long, and there would be another hook at the bottom of that. I have found that the best type of split ring to use is an oval split ring. Oval split rings are a lot stronger than round ones, and because they are of the shape, they're neat enough that you can slide a bit of rig tube over the top of them, and they're nice and neat in the trace.
Does it also get a slightly flattered profile to the bait as well by using the oval split ring?
I can't really comment because I don't use round ones, so I don't know if it's flatter than a round one or not.
Yeah.
But I imagine it would be, yeah.
So you've adapted this slightly from when you were doing this years ago, because you used to use a sea fishing clip with the sleeve over the top.
Now the clip you're talking about is a Genie Clip.
That's the one, a Genie Clip, yeah.
Now, I only use that on the bottom hook, so that's at the bottom of the short trace.
Okay.
And the reason I use a Genie Clip there is it's very easy to take the hook off and put a new hook on.
Yeah.
With a Genie Clip. But just for security, I slide some neoprene tubing over the top of the clip so it can't possibly open out and the hook can't work its way off.
Yeah. That's the one. So would you make the loop of the titanium, would you make it straight to the split ring? So you've got the split ring and the titanium goes straight through it, and then the crimp with the 3-way.
Yes. The split ring is there. I've got basically my top trace. When I make it, it just has a loop at each end.
Yeah.
And the split ring goes through the loop, and the hook goes on the split ring, and the bottom trace goes on the split ring as well. Now, I will issue a word of caution. Something that I only discovered after some years of using titanium traces. The titanium will not corrode, and most crimps are made of copper, which very slowly will corrode. And what happens is, I think you get a cell set up between the two different metals. It takes a long time, but after about 3 or 4 years, the crimp corrodes. So if you're using your traces for a long time, before you start each day, you've got to give them a good old test. And just once, usually about once a season, I'll be giving them a good old test, and the crimp will fall apart. And it's because of that.
Yeah, and that's weird you say that, because I was back end of this season also, because I got some titanium traces because they last forever if you inspect them. Well,
they last forever,
relatively speaking. But I'm thinking, God, I've had these for a couple of years, and I've had a lot of Pike on them. Obviously, you change parts of the module, like you were saying, like the hooks and whatever. And then I was looking at exactly what you said, and I'm thinking, it looks like the crimp's reacting with the wire. And I had never seen it before, but because I'd used them for a long time, I was really putting a lot of pressure on these traces in the end, because it's right at the end of the season anyway, and it just slid through, and it's because the crimp had started to disintegrate. Yeah,
that's what happens.
Yeah, you've got to be really, really careful. But it's a very good idea that you came up with all those years ago, and it is a really good way for dead baits in particular.
Well, using modular traces like that means that if you want to switch from a very small dead bait, let's say like a sardine, up to a full-size herring, you can actually slip off the bottom trace, put on a slightly longer one, and you've still got most of the bait covered.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said earlier, you need less stuff on the bank because you're more efficient, because you've got less things to go wrong, less things to replace throughout the day.
I haven't made a trace on the bank for more than 10 years.
Oh, I never have done, because I always think you make mistakes as well when it's cold and you're not concentrating and you're rushing about. But very good advice. That's weird, because people won't realise this, but we went through some questions, didn't we? And I've just made those ones up off the top of my head, and that's it.
Well, I'm getting on a bit, you know, and you're no spring chicken, and we between us, we've probably done quite a lot of fishing, and we could just sit here all day and just chat.
Yeah,
we don't need to have an agenda.
No, we don't, and I've not followed it at all. Right, Eric, do you want to get onto record tench or near record tench?
It was not a near record tench; it was a record tench.
Oh, go on, tell me the story.
Right, I used to fish with a couple of really crazy people. And probably the craziest one of all was a guy called Alistair Nicholson. I bumped into Alistair fishing the Dorset Stour through. Me and a couple of mates used to go down there every year. And Alistair and his friends used to go at the same time. So for several years in a row, we all met up and we became very friendly. Alistair was a stockbroker. He was quite well off. And he used to live in Reading. From Reading, he moved up towards Oxfordshire, and he lived in a big posh house. But we stayed good friends for many years. Alistair, he's not in good health these days, and in fact, last year he had quite a nasty cycling accident. But he lives in Spain with his wife. He lives in Spain because the climate's so much better for his health. But Alistair used to bailiff on a big gravel pit just outside Reading called Dean's Farm Fishery. Now, although it was described as a fishery, no one ever fished it. It was a great big gravel pit, 80 acres or so, mostly wild and overgrown. Very, very rarely ever saw an angler. And he used to bailiff on there, and we'd have a telephone conversation once every week or two, and he would tell me about these massive tench that he used to see. And Alistair set out to catch these tench. He had some bizarre ideas, did Alistair. And I remember one of his techniques was he spotted these tench quite a way out from the bank, feeding in and around a tree that was in the water. And he, in order to get his bait exactly where he wanted it, he bought a huge fiberglass roach pole. He didn't want to spook the fish, so he painted it sky blue. And he didn't like the idea of bringing big tench in just on a roach pole, so he whipped on a reel halfway up the pole and a set of rings up the top half of the pole. And he was using this pole to lower his bait virtually into the fish's mouth, whereupon he would strike. unship the pole halfway down and then play it out as the pole, as if it was a fishing rod, which is just one of his crazy ideas. I remember one time we were...
Did it work?
Because it was
Eric, did it ever work?
I never saw it work. It never worked when he was in front of me, but maybe it worked when he was on the door. I don't know. I remember another time that the pit was a very young pit with not much mature tree growth, so there weren't many trees for us to climb. And we went to a local hardware store one day, and he said to the young assistant, he said, "I need a ladder." And this guy got this big aluminium step ladder out. He said, "Would it go on the roof of my car?" And the lad said, "Of course it would, sir. I'll carry it out for you." And he carried it out and put it on the roof of his car. And he said, No, he said, "Not like that. I want it set up." And he set the ladder up on the roof of his we and climbed up it in the car park. He said, "Yes, that'll do. I'll take it." And this poor lad must have thought, well, we were completely barking. Because the idea was he could drive his car around the bank, climb the ladder, and have a look at the fish from the top of the ladder, because there were no trees to climb. At the same time...
What was his roof? The car roof must have been scratched to bits.
He didn't care.
Oh,
he didn't care. Alison was like that with his cars. He just didn't care. He would buy an old wreck of a car and make it into an even more of a wreck. And that's what he did. On the same day, the same assistant, he bought a rake. He said, "I'd like to extend the rake." And he said, "I want to make the rake." He said, "Have you got some aluminium?" So we bought a load of aluminium poles and set them all up together with this extending rake. And this lad must have thought he was going to stand on the roof of his car and rake his bloody lawn from 20 feet up, because that's how it appeared. But we fished. We fished at Dean's Farm. Now, Dean's Farm received no angling pressure at all. There was no one fishing there, and you would think that fish that were never caught would be easy to catch. And it's absolutely not true. We could not catch these tench. We could see them. We could see where they were feeding. We could watch them feed, but they wouldn't take our hook baits. They weren't interested. They were feeding on bloodworm and tiny organisms in the gravel and in the silt. And we were putting things like sweet corn and mini boilies and maggots on top of them, and they didn't want to know. And I remember we went the first season we fished, and we tried to pitch fish in this way. We never caught a fish. So the following year, we decided we would really go overboard and try and put in a feed item that was something akin to what they were eating. So we bought about a fortune's worth of red squats. And we just piled these red squats in areas where we'd seen the tench feeding. And very slowly, bit by bit, we got them to start picking up these little maggots. Once they were picking up the maggots and they recognised it as a big food source, they didn't leave the swim. And what we would see would happen, they would come down onto the bait in the morning, they would eat their fill, and then they would sit there all day until they were hungry again, not moving off the swim, just sitting on the gravel. And then in the evening, they would start feeding again, and then it would come dark and they would disappear. We were trying all kinds of rigs to get these things. And because tench are not like carp, they don't feed like carp. They're very dainty feeders. If you watch a tench feed, it tips its entire body up till its nose, till it's almost sort of perpendicular, and its nose is on the gravel, and it's picking small items up. Whereas a carp would stay more or less horizontal and just blunder its way through the gravel and the silt and root everything up. They were coming down on our hook baits, picking up the hook baits, feeling the hook, and just spitting it out.
It's incredible, yeah.
And it wasn't that they were spooked. They just thought, don't like that, I'll have another one, because there's plenty there.
They're not being fished for. They're not even going to know it's a hook, are they? They're just going to
that's right.
Just feel something different and spit it out.
Yeah, and that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we tried lots of rigs. I tried a very, very short bolt rig, just literally with an inch tail on it. And I actually caught one. The first one we caught was £6 15 ounces, £6 14 ounces. I was really pleased with that. And then 3 of us were fishing in a line, me, Alistair and Sid Bolter. And we each had a gravel bar to fish to. And then I changed my rig to, it was a paternoster rig with quite a long bomb tail, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet, and a very, very short hook tail of maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches. That actually worked. And I remember on the day, I got a run, and I brought in a tench of £8, £8 10 ounces. Now we're talking now in the 1980s, and an £8 10 ounce tench was a huge fish.
It was, yeah.
Very, very, very big fish indeed. So I was delighted with that. Alistair, at this point, wondered why I'd caught a fish and he hadn't. So being the good pal that he was, he jumped in. We had the use of a boat. He jumped in the boat and went out and sat on top of my swim. He said, "Oh, I can see all the fish on your swim here." I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, there's a very big one." I said, "Well, get off." So him and Sid came back to the bank. I had another run. I caught a £7 5 ounce tench. Again, for the time, it was a very big fish. And then Sid and Alistair went off in the boat somewhere. This is the bizarre way he thought. I'd got the tench feeding. He was fishing in the next swim. Rather than sit there and catch a fish, he decided to have a go off in the boat. So he went. And while they were both gone in the boat, I got another run, and I brought in this enormous tench. Now, at the time, the tench record was, I think, £10, 1 ounce, 2 drams. I think it was Tony Chester had held the tench record at the time. And I brought in this tench, and I thought, that is huge, an enormous tench. And I got it on the scales, and I weighed it £10 3 ounces. Well, the other two had gone. I thought, I've got a record tench here, and they've buggered off. I'm going to have to get them. So I put the tench in a sack in the water, and I ran off, and they'd gone hundreds of yards down the bank in this boat, and I went screaming at them, come on, I've caught a record tench. And Alistair didn't believe me, of course, but they came back, and we weighed the tench again, and it had actually dropped in weight because it had done a bit of a poo in the sack. And it had dropped in weight, and we recorded it at £10 2 ounces, which was a new British record. Now, there's quite a bit of controversy at the time because the old British Record Fish Committee were very stringent that you had to produce the body of the fish to claim a record. And I wasn't prepared to kill a fish. At the time, the National Association of Specialist Anglers was running, and they were setting up their own rival record fish committee. Yeah. So I actually made a claim with the National Association of Specialist Anglers Record Fish Committee. I remember the person I rang to claim the record was Des Taylor, who currently won't speak to me, unfortunately. But that's his problem, not mine. And I claimed the record there. And I claimed the record at £10 2 ounces. It lasted for just over a year, and then it was beaten by a fish of £10 10 ounces. Joe Darville, I think, was the name of the guy who caught that. And of course, from then on, the tench record just skyrocketed, and we ended up with a fish of over 15 pounds. But at the time, I think it's true to say that my record tench was only the second double-figure tench that have been fairly caught on rod and line in this country.
There's two things I'm going to ask you about this capture. The first one is I'm going to be a bit cheeky. Some anglers may have been tempted to weigh fish and poo in the same sack. I'm not going to mention any pike anglers here. That's another story. We'll carry on this conversation when I press the stop recording button. Also, you were using basically the beginnings of a chod rig, weren't you, that carp anglers use, with a with a very short hook length, but further up the line.
I suppose that.
It wasn't running, was it? But it was fixed. But why?
It wasn't running.
But why did you do that? Like, was it a weedy area you were fishing in, or were you casting a long way and you knew it would drop back and it would help with the presentation?
The point of it was that the tench were picking up the bait and not moving. So if we'd used a straightforward, say, running lead or something like that, the tench would have had to move a third distance before they gave us an indication. By using this rig, the tench can't move more than a couple of inches before it gives you a good indication. And that was the only reason. And each time, those 3 tenches that I caught, each time I got a reasonably good twitchy run. But it wasn't a full-blooded screaming run. It was just a twitchy bite. And that's all we were ever getting from those fish. They just weren't moving with the bait.
I suppose they had no reason
Incidentally,
to.
Well, they had no reason to.
No.
It's an incredibly rich pit. Even without the feed that we put in, it was an incredibly rich pit. And they would just sit there and eat.
They're not getting caught, and they're not going to know what it is. They're just going to sit there with it in their mouths, I suppose, and just shake their heads a little bit and toddle off. And
yeah, sometimes we had baits chewed off the hooks because they would just pick it up, not be afraid of the hook because they didn't know what a hook was, just chew the bait off it, spit the hook out, and carry on feeding.
Wow, that's incredible, because it's incredibly rare now, one, to find a water where there's no angling pressure at all, and two, it's like it'd be utopia, wouldn't it, to be in that situation now where you've got something all to yourselves and you could experiment with these things.
No, they were good days. We had right across the country there was fishing. You could find fishing that you had to yourself. You pretty much can't do it now.
No, it's such a shame. You're no stranger to big bream either, are you?
Well, we fished Dean's Farm for a couple of years, and we caught a few tench. We didn't catch that many. They were difficult. That double figure tench was the only one that we caught. That 10-2, only double. We had quite a lot of 8s and a sprinkling of 9s. And then we turned our attention to bream from the same pit. We never caught anything massive. I think the biggest I had from there was 11-pound odd. I remember Alistair kept on hooking these, what he thought were big bream, which kept snapping him. He maintains to this day that they were massive bream, but I think perhaps the odd carp was picking up his bait now and again. Certainly, when we went out at night, we used to go out at night in the punt and have a look what was happening on the bars. And occasionally you'd see a 20 to 30 pound carp come swimming through, but there weren't very many carp in there. But we lost the fishing on Dean's because it was turned into a marina. And in actual fact, we just commented on the fact that you can't easily find virgin fishing these days. And it's not because of fishing pressure. It's because of competition from other water users more than anything. Lots of places get turned into water ski pits or bird reserves or marinas in this case. And as the place was turned into a marina, we were looking around for somewhere new to fish in the area. And Alistair had picked up a rumour that somebody found a double-figure bream dead on this pit called Queenfoot Lagoon. And so we went and had a look at Queenfoot Lagoon. And it was another Dean's Farm type fishery that clearly there were no marks on the bank. Nobody was fishing the place. And we had to actually cut a couple of swims out because there was nowhere to sit down and actually cast in. So we cut a couple of swims out. And I lived 160 miles away. So it was time for me to go home, go to work. But Alistair said, well, I'm going to fish. I'll fish tomorrow. So the following day, I wondered, there was no internet in those days. It was, I didn't even have a mobile phone. No mobile phone. I rang Alice's house the next day, and he'd gone to work. But his wife said, "Oh, well, Alice's been out and caught a bream." I said, "How big?" And she said, "Oh, I'm sure." He said it was 13 pound 14 ounces. Now, at the time, that was the weight of the record bream.
Wow.
And that had come. The record bream had come from the TC pit at Oxford, Thames Conservancy pit, it's called. So I said, no, you've got that wrong. I said, £13 14 ounces is the weight of the record bream. No, she said, I'm sure he said £13 14 ounces. So that night when he got home from work, I phoned him again and he said, yeah, I went this morning. I had one of £13 14 ounces, which equaled the then record. He said, I'm going again in the morning. And he went again the next morning and I phoned up. What have you had now? He said, I had another one. He said, £13 12 ounces. And this was quite astonishing, obviously. And then he didn't fish for a week, and I couldn't go because I was working. I think it was the following week, he phoned me. He said, I've had another one. I said, how big? He said, £15 6.
Oh.
And as luck would have it, the bream record had just been broken by a guy called Tony Bromley from a Staffordshire Mere. And that was £15 16 ounces. So Alistair, for the second time in that season, he'd equalled the bream record with a different weight of bream. I went and joined him the following week, and he caught a fish of 14 in front of me, and I caught a £2 roach bream hybrid, and that was all. But I went again a week or two later, and I had one of £15. I had two bream in consecutive casts of £15 2 and £14 4.
Ooh.
So the £15 2 was actually just 4 ounces short of the bream record. The fish got bigger and bigger. After a while, I left Queenford, but the fish got bigger and bigger, and they caught the 12 for £16. But none of this sounds so impressive when you put them alongside today's catches. But of course, this was back in the 1980s, and a £15 bream were unheard of in the 1980s. No one had ever caught bream of that size. These days, £15 bream come from almost anywhere, don't they?
Well, I don't know. That's incredible fishing, Eric, isn't it? Because you guys were fishing waters that had no track record that you knew of, really. You just used to go down and try different things. And also, there's something else I was going to say to you that you've just touched on. You travel an awful long distance for decent fishing as well. You were in the 80s. You were racking the miles up, going to Reading and back and all over the place. That's so you were obviously putting yourself about to fish these waters where you thought there was a really good chance of getting a whacker from.
Andy, I live in St Helens.
Yeah.
My nearest river is the River Mersey, and for the first half of my life, it was the most polluted waterway in Western Europe. If you fell in the River Mersey, you were more danger of dying from poisoning than you were of drowning.
God.
It was so badly polluted. The River Mersey these days is much cleaner, and it supports some big fish. But I live in an industrialised environment. I've worked all my life in the chemical industry, and all the landscape around the area where I live is being corrupted by heavy industry of some form or another. Clean water is something that is these days it's a bit of a novelty to us. We never used to have it at all. And in terms of specimen fishing close to where I live never existed 30 or 40 years ago. There were never any specimen fish, so I had to travel.
Yeah. I know you certainly do. And some of your we only touched on some of them, but some of the stories you've told me, you've been all over the place. It's incredible. Let's go back 5 or 10 minutes, because you've got a magnificent memory for all this as well. We're lucky in the Fens that we have our waterways and our waters, and we just go fishing. But you fish lots of areas that you've lost. The fishing rights have been lost, and we're not allowed to fish certain areas now. And I forget about all this because obviously it doesn't happen around here. So maybe if you could touch on 2 or 3 examples of canals that perhaps you've lost the fishing rights to over the past, or of situations whereby fishing's not allowed, or because it's quite good to get a balance of how different pressures around the country on fishing.
Well, the problem is, and you've got to be as old as me to know this, really, because young people don't know the way things used to be. But it used to be that you would have access to pretty well anywhere to fish, and there are lots of up around Wigan, for instance. There are lots and lots of flashes at Wigan, and I live not far from Wigan. There are lots of flashes that are caused by mining subsidence. So basically, the mining subsidence has caused the land to fall. It's filled up with water, and there's lots of quite good fish in these pits. Bit by bit, these have become nature reserves and bird sanctuaries. And even places where you are still allowed to fish, what they tend to do is they will the bird lovers or the nature people will set up a false bank 10 yards out. So the bank becomes 10 yards out. You can't cast to the main water because you've got a false bank. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or they will set up places for birds to roost out from the main swims, so you can't fish there anymore. And there are lots of places up at, I mean, one of the biggest flashes in my area is Scotsman's Flash. And the fishing on Scotsman's Flash has become severely restricted by the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. It's not as bad in my part of the world as it is in some other parts of the world. I know over in Nottinghamshire, the Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust have completely banned fishing from hundreds of acres of pits. And this is an amenity that's been lost to anglers. But banning fishing is not the only issue. We've lost waters. I mentioned Dean's Farm was lost to it became a marina. We've lost waters to other water users. We've lost waters. In some cases, we've lost waters to other anglers because unfortunately, some places get taken over by carp anglers. And one of the things that they do is they net out the things that they call nuisance fish. So all these tench, roach, bream, pike, perch that people used to catch in these pits, they're being scooped up and dumped somewhere else. And they're turning a lot of these pits into monocultures, you know. Syndication of our fisheries is becoming more of a problem than an advantage. In my view, the syndication is one of the reasons young people are not coming into our sport. All these places that you or I used to go as a kid, a pit where, you know, anyone could fish, no one can fish there now except the people who pay a lot of money for the syndicate.
Well, you're right. As you're saying this, I'm thinking of a few pits actually that were used for gravel workings near some of the drains, and you've actually reminded me some of these pits now have been taken over by people who've got money in the area, and you're right, they're just turning them into syndicate waters. But these are places that we used to go to, and guys that I know are 20 years older than me, they talk about these places fondly from their childhood that they used to go to. Yeah, and you forget about this because there's no access unless you're going to pay £500,000 a year. So you kind of forget about it. But actually, you're right, they're still there. But you can get on them if you want to pay the money, but it's carp only, and why would you want to do that? Eric, we really need to get into the Blythfield story because I know you don't like to shout about your captures, but they were quite unique. So I think we need to explore Blythfield, and at that time period, the fish it was throwing up to you and the other syndicate members.
Yeah, well, you know, I think people have the wrong idea about Blythfield. I think there was a feeling at the time that you just had to cast in and a 30 would jump on your lure. And Blythfield was never like that at all. The Blythfield went through a bit of a dark patch when it was run by a trout fishing club, Blythfield Anglers, and they had quite a stock of pike in there. I do know that at the time, one or two people were members of Blythfield Anglers and were catching some huge pike on flies. They said they were on flies anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. But Blythfield Anglers wanted some of the pike removed, and they were advised by the fisheries manager to have pike under 25 pounds removed. So they organised some trials at which they invited decent pike anglers to come and catch pike, and the fish under 25 pounds were to be removed. Now the story was that these pike, because the water had a category 2 parasite, they all had to be killed. But in actual fact, one of the anglers who was going to fish the trials had organised for them to be moved to another water which already had the parasite. So that was all actually above board, but unfortunately it caused a lot of upset within the pike angling world. And I remember at the time several people were thrown out of the Pike Anglers Club for fishing these trials. It left a bad taste in some people's mouths, and I know some of the people involved still haven't rejoined the PAC to this day. it wasn't handled very well, sadly.
What? Because that sounds like a common sense approach, actually, Eric. If rather than kill the fish, move them to another water that has the same issues, that kind of was it lost in translation to the PAC that was happening?
I'm really not sure what went wrong. I know the person who'd organised the transfer, and I know he's a decent bloke, and I don't doubt him for a minute that it's all sorted out. But maybe you're right. Maybe it was just a communication mistake or what. I don't really know exactly how it went so badly wrong. But either way, there was a second series of trials organised, which started in 2000, I think it was, the year 2000, at which the trout club relented. They decided they were not going to remove any pike at all, but they were going to charge top dollar for good pike fishing. I got the opportunity to fish, and I asked Gary Knowles to fish with me. We signed up for it was a total of 8 days a year that we were allowed to fish, 4 weekends, and it was rock hard. Blithfield was a very hard fishery. I remember in my first season on Blithfield, the sum total of all the pike I caught was 1 12-pounder, and that was all. We were only allowed to lure fish. We could lure fish from bank or boat, and literally it was a case of there being very, very few pike present. Even jacks were thin on the ground, and I used to joke at the time that you would catch as many 30-pounders as you would jacks, and it was actually true. You wouldn't catch jacks. So that first year, I had a 12-pounder, but Gary did much better, and I think he had a couple of fish, including a 31. And as I recall, that was on a trolled super shad wrap in about 16 feet of water, quite close to the causeway that divides the lake in two. On the second year, having learned a bit about the water, we basically just went through the motions again, really, and were casting and lashing the water to a foam. One day in October, Gary and I moved into this spot in the southern half of the reservoir. Unbeknown to us, Mick Brown and Matt Hayes had just moved out of that spot, Matt having caught a 30-pounder, which I think at the time was his personal best, maybe still is, I don't know. But we didn't know that they'd fished there. We just sort of saw a place where there was nobody fishing, and we moved in. And we were casting towards some gabions on the bank. The gabions, basically, these are big sort of wire cages filled with rocks that bolster the bank and stop erosion. But they were wave action that caused these gabions to become undercut, so there was a gap underneath them, and the pike were actually sitting underneath the gabions in just a few feet of water tight to the bank. So the trick was to cast towards the gabions, but obviously stop short and try and tempt these fish from underneath the cover. Well, as I recall, I think I was using a spring dog or a bulldog or something like that. And I cast towards these gabions, a lousy cast, hooked the damn things. So we had to go over to the bank and unhook my lure. And Gary said, couldn't you put something on that is less likely to snag? So I did. I changed to a mag grub fished on a jig head. So basically there was only one upturned hook rather than the multiple hooks that you find on a spring dog. And started casting again, and very soon hooked what was obviously a very big fish right tight to the bank. Anyway, we got it in, got it aboard, and it weighed 37 pound 8 ounces. Oof. A big fat fish it was. And we took a few pictures on the boat and dropped it back in, and I noticed that one or two boats had crept a bit closer, as tends to happen when you're catching fish.
Yeah, boatitis.
Yeah. And then about 20 minutes later, just basically doing the same thing, I hooked another fish, and as it came in, I remember Gary saying, "This looks bigger," and I thought, surely not. Anyway, they don't fight that hard, these big trout water fish. They're not like wild fish. But anyway, we got it in the boat, And sure enough, it was a very big fish. And when we put it onto I had some 40-pound avens. We put it on the 40-pound avens, and it went bump. Oh, it was a bit too heavy for the 40-pound avens. So we had to catch some other scales. Well, at this point, quite a number of people had spotted what was going on, and they came closer. And everybody wanted to see this fish, so we went up to the bank, took it over to the bank, which is only like 30 yards away, and climbed out. And somebody else, I think it was Jason Davis, actually weighed the fish on his scales. I can't quite remember now, but it was. I didn't actually see the scales, but Jason said it's 41 pound 8 ounces. By now, there were probably about 30 people had gathered on the bank because word got round very quickly. So I just held the fish up, and lots of people took photographs. So there's lots of people who got photographs of the fish. It was a lovely, great, big, long fish, very different in shape to the first one. The first one was a tubby fish, but this was a great, big, long thing. I never actually measured it, but I suspect it was from tip to tip. It could well have been a 50-inch pike. So that was it, really. It wasn't a great angling feat. It was just a case of being there and cast it in, you know.
A few people came to witness a 40-pounder, and you told me about one pair that came up in particular in their boat.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to get onto that now. After we'd photographed the fish and we returned it to the water, everybody got back in their boats and everybody went out and carried on fishing. And someone had rung Neville Pickling, and said Eric's caught these 2 pike. So Neville and Nige were in the other part of the reservoir, so they came through the causeway and came right over to us and tied up to our boat. And Nige Williams held out his hand to congratulate me on this capture, while on the other side of the boat, Neville was casting a lure into our swim, which is just Neville all over. I've seen him do that several times. He didn't catch anything anyway.
No. I bet he had that little grin on his face. I should think, muttering to himself as he's.
Oh no, I don't know about grin. I mean, Neville's super serious about his pike fishing. You know, he would be wanting to catch. Make no mistake. But anyway, we chased those 2 away and carried on fishing for a bit. And I remember Gary had another good fish. He had a 20, I think 21 or 22 pounds in the same area. So it was obviously a tactic that worked well. And I mean, bear in mind that, like I say, Matt Hayes had caught a 30-pounder in the same spot half an hour or so before mine. And it was a great time for fishing on Blithfield. It was that season. I think we had 15 fish over 35 pounds or something like that between the syndicate members. And I remember Jason Davis was trying to collate pictures of Blithfield captures from all the syndicate members to see if there were many recaptures. And from memory, I believe he managed to pull together 18 pictures of different captures of 30-pounders. And the astonishing thing is that of these 18 captures, there was only one recapture, and that was actually the 40-pounder I got aboard. All of these fish were just being caught once and then never being seen again. Now, some people might. This is a cause and effect thing. Some people might think that's because of bad handling or because they couldn't stand the pressure of being caught. I have a different take on it. I think these fish were living very short, fast lives. I think they were growing incredibly quickly. We weren't taking much notice of them when they were in the teens and in the 20s, only really taking notice of them when they were in the 30s. When by the time they were in their 30s, they were probably in the last year or 2 of their life. Yeah. The fish I had gained 7 pounds in the previous year. So it was growing at a tremendous rate. Bear in mind that when I caught it, it wasn't a fat thing, as I just said. It was a big, long fish. And after I caught it, that one was never seen again either. And I really do believe that it wasn't a case of handling. It was just a case of these fish were probably only living 9 or 10 years and then dying just of old age, because that's as long as Blithfield pike lived. Now, the fishing on Blithfield was quite difficult, but the rewards were there, with some really big fish to be caught. And then I think it was the summer of 2003, everything changed. That was a year of high water temperatures, thick algal bloom. We knew there'd been a fish kill, a very bad fish kill. And when we went back the following winter, very little was caught. Very little. I recall, I can only think of a few 20-pounders, handful of 20-pounders, and those fish were covered in sores and in very poor condition. And we can only assume that the high water temperatures, the algal bloom, coupled with parasites in the water, Argulus in particular, had seen a lot of the pike off.
Yeah,
and in all honesty, Blithfield has never recovered those glory days. It's never come back to the way it was.
No.
Occasionally, we get these. Every few years now, we get these high water temperatures, low water levels, and not just affecting Blithfield, affecting many waters.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think we were talking about this the other day before we lost the phone connection, that Chew's been the only one that really has kept up its track record until recently.
It's kept up the track record for many years, and in 2018 and 2019, we've had 2 summers where we've had periods of exceptionally high temperatures.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that what's done for Chew, and that's not just done for Chew, it's done for a lot of waters, is these high temperatures which have led on to algal blooms and other problems for the pike, and the pike have not been able to cope with it. I suspect as climate change progresses, we're going to see pike fishing suffer quite badly in this country.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm just thinking back to examples in my head. I'm sure you're absolutely spot on. Let's just go back to those 2 captures one last time, Eric. Can you explain your emotions after having those 2 fish in the boat?
Well, do you know, I at the time, I'd never caught an English 30. I'd had 30s from elsewhere, but I'd never caught an English 30, and I did very much want to catch an English 30. I've had a few English 30s now. And that 37 was, in fact, my first English 30, and I was very pleased with the 37. The 37 tends to get forgotten a bit and bypassed, but I was in a way, I was more pleased with catching the 37 because it was my first English 30.
Yeah.
But I mean, anyone's pleased to catch fish, and catching big fish is very exciting. But you've got to put things into context. These are trout water fish, and trout water fish are not, in my view, are not as meritorious as wild fish, which I think I'm given the choice, I would fish wild waters and catch big fish from wild waters. So they were really nice to catch, but they're not something I tend to dwell on quite a lot,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't know where I sit with this really, because obviously the drains, catching a fen 30 is the rarest of all rare beasts, and I think once you've had 1 or 2 of those under your belt, you can sit there with a smug look on your face the rest of your life. But having said that, catching fish of the size you've had, just to see those creatures must be, I mean, that 41.5, just to have seen the sheer size of that fish would have...
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in what you say.
Yeah.
When they get to over 35 pounds, they become more of an, I don't know, it's hard to describe, more of an animal than a fish.
Yeah.
They become something that is in itself quite a big creature, and you don't really look at them in the same light.
No, difference. I had a 54. I was lucky enough to catch a 54.5-inch muskie, and that fish, I should never forget the sheer size of its head, let alone anything else. I mean, let alone how long it was. But it's just, yeah, it seems like another different subspecies when you get extra special fish, doesn't it? They're just, you think,
yes,
wow.
There is a difference. They reach a point where they're just a different kind of creature.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, these are big fish. But the very big fish I caught from Loch Mask knocks them into a cocked hat. Make no mistake.
Well, should we talk about the pug-nosed Irish pike?
Have we not talked about that?
No.
Oh, good Lord. Have I not mentioned that?
No, we need to mention this.
In 1996, a friend and I went over to Loch Mask for a fishing trip. I'd never fished in Ireland before. In fact, neither of us had. And we went and fished Loch Mask. Now, Loch Mask is a fabulous water, absolutely the most gorgeous place on earth. It's 22,000 acres. It's a big, wild, windswept, rocky place. In a fabulous setting in the mountains over towards the west of Ireland. The peace, the tranquility, it's just an absolutely wonderful place to be. But at the time, it held some absolutely enormous pike. Now, the Western Regional Fisheries Board that were controlling things at that time had been netting Loch Mask and poisoning the pike on Loch Mask for decades. They tried their very best to eradicate them and failed because basically pike are just too fecund. They breed too easily. You can't eliminate pike. But these people had failed. And in the late 80s or early 90s, they'd given up. And after years of persecuting the pike, they stopped. And this meant that the few pike that were still there grew on with very little competition, feeding on brown trout, which was the main stock fish in the place, and they got very large. And slowly word was creeping out that big fish were to be had in Loch Mask in the late 90s. So Kevin Dunn and I went and had a trip over to Loch Mask. The plan was for Kevin and I to fish for a week together, and then Kevin had to go home and go to work. And I was to be joined by my family for the second week. So in the first week, Kevin and I went out and fished every day, found it very hard. We just exclusively lure fished. And at the time, in 1996, neither of us was any great shakes as a lure angler. But on the first day of fishing, Kevin had a 25-pounder. So that was a big success for us. On the second day of fishing, we went out in Malmtrasna Bay, and I was lucky enough to catch my first 30-pounder at 31 pound 12, and that was on a small green spinnerbait in 4 feet of water on a bitterly cold day in February. And we fished on for another week. Kevin and I didn't catch another pike, but what we did see a huge fish. The day after I caught the 30, I was using the same spinnerbait there's a little group of islands at the mouth of Malmtrasna Bay, and we were in amongst these islands, again in shallow water. And this enormous pike followed my lure back to the boat. Even to this day, I would say I've never seen a bigger pike. And it followed the lure right to the boat, but wouldn't take it. Now, had I known what I know now about lure fishing, I'd be confident about catching that fish. But at the time, I didn't know what to do, and this pike just followed and followed and followed and followed. Eventually, when it got to the boat, it turned, went underneath the boat and swam away, and we never saw it again. But it was a very big pike indeed. Anyway, at the end of that week, Kevin went home, and my family came and joined me, and things had to change then. It wasn't sort of do or die pike fishing. It was a case of fishing for a few hours in the morning, out with my son, Joe, and then in the afternoon, the whole family would have a day out somewhere. We'd find somewhere to eat. We'd go to the pub in the evening and have a couple of drinks, and then back home to the digs, and then Joe and I up before dawn the next morning. So it was quite punishing in a way. And then a couple of days into this, and we took the boat round to this where Loch Mask joins the upper Mask, which is another loch, and there's a short section of streamy water there at the ferry bridge, and we started fishing there. And this time I set up a drifter with a whole mackerel on it and set it off drifting away from the boat. Joe was fishing a legend deadbait, but at the same time we were casting lures. And after about half an hour of casting lures, the drifter float, which was by now 60, 70 yards away from the boat, just slipped beneath the waves. And I pulled into what felt like a brick wall. This was an absolutely solid resistance. And
Anyway, heaved and heaved at this fish until it came close to the boat. Bear in mind, we were fishing in crystal clear water, and it was a little bit weedy, but only 11 feet deep. And as this fish came close to the boat, we could see the immense size of it. I remember it went round the anchor rope at one point, and I had to shove the rod underneath the water, rod and reel, thread it round the anchor rope and get back connected with the fish again. Anyway, we got it on board, and it was a huge pug-nose pike, weighing 38 pounds 12 ounces. An immense creature, and I've got a few photographs of it from 20 odd years ago now, but it's still as strong as ever in my mind, and in my mind that's the finest fish I've ever caught.
Seeing it in the water as well is something else, isn't it? Where you got a big fish on, you can see it in crystal clear water, you kind of it gets all the senses firing off at the same time.
Well, you know, Andy, a lot of the places I fish are natural big waters, and generally speaking, crystal clear water is the order of the day. Most of the places I fish, I can see the fish even when they're quite deep down, and that is, you're right, that is it's a big part of pike fishing, to watch a huge pike twisting and turning and writhing in the water right underneath you, fighting for its life as far as the pike's concerned. It's a very exciting thing to do. It sums up. It's the very best part of pike fishing for me.
Yeah, it's great. And you were talking about mask. I mean, I think the same time period. I'm sure it was. Yes, it was. I'd gone over to Corrib and I was fishing, and I was staying at Adam Broderick's place. And and I didn't have a. I mean, I was struggling. I was learning my trade on the fen drains, and on those big waters, clueless. But what a beautiful part of the country.
It's magnificent, isn't it?
Oh, breathtaking. It really is. We for a day, we didn't fish for one day. We drove around. Some of the roads go along Corrib and along Mask, and I can't remember the name of the town. I'm sure you do. It's where the springs come through. You have these whirlpools coming through onto the a part of a river that connects the two locks. It's quite incredible. And I can't think what it's called, but you need a lifetime just to explore it. It's such a beautiful place. And a few years later, I started fishing Derg with a friend, and that was not quite as stark in scenery, but again, just absolutely stunning. I mean, Ireland's such a beautiful country to fish, isn't it? But
it is. But you know, there's a sad end to my tale, because the year after I caught that huge fish, the fisheries board started up the netting again.
Yeah.
And it persists to this day. It's complete madness.
Yeah.
They've got a potential, a true potential to earn a fortune from tourism. They have got the jewel in pike fishing's crown there. Those waters up the western locks, they're just magnificent, and they are determined to destroy them. The netting has carried on now for more than 20 years. It's done in the name of brown trout fishing, and yet they don't tell you the figures on the brown trout returns, because in actual fact, netting the pike has not improved the trout fishing at all.
No, we know why it won't. It's incredible. I remember Alan having pike nailed to his fence posts, and even I'm sure his wife used to get hassled when she was working in Dublin, to the extent he had to just move to the middle part.
Their behaviour is disgusting. Yeah, to this day, their behaviour is disgusting.
Yeah, incredible.
And they think, for some reason, these trout anglers think that they're a cut above pike anglers, and in all honesty, some of them are the lowest of the low.
Well, it's a shame, because you're exactly right what you're saying with the pike fishing. Could be, well, it'd be probably the world's finest if they just left it alone. That's the crazy thing. They don't have to do anything.
They don't have to do anything. And if you think about it from a tourism point of view, trout fishing is a summer occupation. You only do it in the summer. Whereas pike fishing is usually a winter occupation. You do it in the winter. And they could extend the tourist season right round the calendar if they would just leave the pike alone and advertise good pike fishing.
Yeah. Crazy. Never will work it out. I don't think we'll ever change it, and it's such a sad state of affairs, because, as you've proved, and what was the size of Neville's fish that he had? during that time.
Oh, Neville had one 4 ounces lighter than mine, 38 pounds 8.
Yeah, but again, I haven't seen pictures of yours. I've seen pictures of his. Huge framed fish, as they would be out there. And again, a different subspecies, as we were saying a bit earlier, when you have one of those in the boat. It must be awe-inspiring to have such a creature in the boat with the backdrop as well, and the whole ambience of where you were fishing.
Oh, it's something I'll never forget. Yeah. If you want to see a picture of mine, Andy, if you look at my Facebook page, the background picture on my homepage is that fish.
Cool. I'm gonna, as soon as we finish this phone call, I shall be looking, because big pike, big muskie, they are something else. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right, Eric, thank you so much for doing this. I'm just going to tell listeners what happened, because some of the cute-eared listeners out there will notice that we've got a slight change in the middle of the podcast, and we had all sorts of problems 2 days ago with the phone reception. So Eric has kindly re-recorded for me the Blithfield chapter, so we'll slot that into the middle of the podcast. It won't quite mesh exactly, but hey-ho, we couldn't miss it out because it was just too great to tell. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, we got this ridiculous... I think it was like a 5-second delay a few minutes ago.
Yeah, your mouth was doing this, and then you were speaking.
Yeah, and you were saying some brilliant stuff, and I was going, "Oh, don't do this to me," because you were losing. I know, it was losing a few words on the recording, and I'm thinking, "This is brilliant. What's going on?" Oh, anyway, I've started recording again, so hopefully we'll be okay.
All right.
Don, you were talking about chew and 30 degrees, because I think you're right. You were talking about water temperature and pike just dying regardless of being caught.
Well, that's a fact. It's whether they're caught or not. When the water temperature approaches 30 degrees, pike can't tolerate that temperature and they die.
Yeah.
They just die.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than that. When you have high temperatures and a lot of bright sun, because so many of our waters are heavily eutrophic, we get algal blooms. Now, algal blooms are fatal for pike, absolutely fatal. I remember in the early years fishing Blithfield, the fishing was absolutely fantastic in the year 2000, 2001 and 2002. And then the following summer, we had a very hot summer and a heavy algal bloom. And the fishing was rubbish after that. And to be honest, it's never really picked up after that. I think the theory is that the algae clog the pike's gills. They can't breathe, they suffocate and die.
Yeah.
And I think chews had exactly that problem. I think in 2018 and probably 2019 as well, there's probably been a big algal bloom. A lot of pike have died, and the fishing now is not what it was.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. It's this high. They don't like these high temperatures, and in the southwest of the country, it's going to be at its warmest as well as it comes in from the Gulf Stream. So it's just going to magnify the problem. And the other thing
it's not just temperature though, Andy. This is a really important point. I mentioned eutrophication, and it's a scourge in our country. It is absolutely damaging pike fishing everywhere. One of the best examples I'll give you is the River Wye. Now, the River Wye has got some tremendous pike fishing, but over the past few years, people have noted that it's slowly going downhill. And everybody says it's otters, or everybody says it's angling pressure, but nobody's taking note of the fact that up in the Welsh mountains, a load of chicken farms have sprung up.
Ah, right.
And the effluent is going directly into the river. And every year now, anyone who lives along the River Wye will tell you, every year in the summer, the river has a severe algal bloom.
Wow, because you would never have thought that on the Wye.
No, but that's what's happening.
Ah.
And in my view, the algal bloom is the primary cause of the demise of pike fishing on the Wye.
Wow, I never knew that. Well, yeah, I know I look on Rutland, and sometimes they get this horrible blue colour that you would use in your detergent to put in your washing machine. It is bright blue, and you just think, what can survive in that? And they even stop dogs from being walked along the shore at Rutland when this happens because of the dogs.
You're talking about the blue-green algae.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny you should mention detergent in your washing machine, because I don't sure if you're aware of it, the primary source of phosphates that's entering our watercourses is from washing machine detergent.
Wow. Yeah.
Washing powder is
I remember you telling me this before.
full of
Go on,
phosphate.
explain it again, Eric. This is really interesting.
Well, washing powder is full of phosphate. It's. I used to work in the phosphates industry, so I know this stuff. It's a sequestrant. Basically, when the dirt comes out of your clothes and goes into solution, the phosphate clings to it and stops it going back onto the washing. So it keeps the dirt off your washing and it gets washed away. But the phosphate then gets into our water systems. Some places have got phosphate stripping installed, but it's very, very expensive, not very efficient. So as the phosphate gets into our watercourses, so the algae uses it as a nutrient and you get an algal bloom.
Right.
And phosphate is the biggest enemy to fish, and particularly to pike, in England, in my view. Lake Windermere, for a time, was probably the finest pike fishery in Britain. And it was very, very good indeed. There were a lot of big pike to be caught, and a lot of sport, tremendous sport. But the Lake District has something like 18 million visitors a year. And all their clothes have to be washed. They're constantly flushing the toilet. There is phosphate coming out of all those people one way or another, and it's ending up in the lakes. And the lakes should be a pristine environment, but they are heavily polluted with phosphate. As a result, the char that used to be abundant in Windermere have now all but gone.
Yeah.
Because the algal bloom tends to cause silt deposition, and the silt is deposited on the char spawning beds. The char have got nowhere to spawn, so the char have gone down the pan, and they were the primary food source for the pike.
Yep. I remember you telling me this last summer. Now, am I allowed to say how you know this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think the study was done by a guy who was employed by one of the chemical companies. So his findings never came to light. Is that correct?
No. Lake Windermere is the most studied lake in the world. And the pike population in Lake Windermere is the most studied population of fish anywhere. It's been intensively studied since the 1940s. And it's been studied by means of gill netting. So basically the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology gill net a proportion of the pike every year. They kill them all, they cut them open, they find out what they've been feeding on, they find out their growth rate, they find out everything about these pike. And Dr. Ian Winfield, who certainly was running the study and probably still is running the study, was very forthcoming with his information to me, because I made it my business to find out.
Right, yeah.
The pike fishing on Windermere was going down the pan. And the first thing pike anglers do when they've got a problem is turn on each other.
Yes.
And everybody was saying it's your fault. You're writing a blog, and it's causing too many people to come, or it's Gord Burton's fault, or it's whoever's fault. Whoever's done a program or an article or something on Windermere, it was their fault, because the fishing pressure is what's causing the loss of the pike. It's not. It was never true. None of it was true. The problem on Windermere was that eutrophication from phosphate had killed off the char, and so the pike had no food. And the anecdotal evidence is that the char population has fallen by 99% on Windermere.
I remember you telling me that, yeah.
Which in my view is a national disgrace, because this is an iconic ancient species that's lived in that water since the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And we've wiped it out. And consequently, the stock of pike, in terms of numbers of pike, has fallen by 75%. But then the condition factor comes into it, and the condition of the remaining pike has fallen significantly as well. So in terms of loss of biomass of pike, we've probably lost 80%.
How many percent was that, Eric? Because I lost you then.
We've probably lost 80% of the pike biomass.
Wow, yeah.
So that's why Windermere has gone from probably the best pike fishery in Britain to very much a very ordinary water in the space of a decade.
Yeah. And that's criminal, isn't it? That we're causing this demise in our own environment. It's unbelievable, really.
It's happening all over the country, every river, every piece of water. If you wanted to catch a big pike, say from the Cheshire Meres, you would really struggle, because the Cheshire Meres are all surrounded by farmland that have got lots of nitrates and phosphates put on the farm every year. It's all finding its way into the water. There's an algal bloom every year, and the pike are suffering for it.
Yeah.
This eutrophication is pike fishing's biggest problem.
Yeah. It's widespread, because I just think of like the resis around us, they all suffer from it, and we have get to a certain amount of sunlight on the water and poof, it starts. I'm sure you're absolutely spot on about chew as well. It just makes perfect sense. Oh dear, doom and gloom, but it's not all doom and gloom. Come on, let's touch on the Team England and how you first started fishing for England and lure fishing for England, because this is brilliant.
You know, Andy, I was never a competition angler at all, and it was shortly after I packed in my job and I had lots of time on my hands. I'd retired at 53, remember, and I think it was Mike Skipper. I saw an advert on the internet from Mike Skipper saying, I've been appointed the new England boat fishing, lure fishing team manager, and I'm looking for a team. Now, he didn't have time to run trials because it was only a couple of months away from the World Championships. The first World Championships I fished was in Ireland on the Earn system. And so he asked for people to apply for membership of the team. I applied. I vaguely knew Mike. I'd met him a couple of times. And he accepted me as a squad member. And I'll be honest with you, I was petrified, because although I'm very much a pike angler, and not a bad one, and quite a good lure angler, I really didn't think I'd be able to match up to these guys that you see catching, competition fishing and speeding around in the lycra underwear and stuff like that. But I thought, I'm going to give it a go. So we had the first World Championship that England participated in was in Northern Ireland on the Earn system. And we made it very much a family affair. I took my wife with me, Claire, and other members of the squad took their wives and partners. We found we were the only team that did that. Every other nation, they were so heavily focused on the fishing, the women were excluded. And it was quite a baptism of fire, to be honest. I remember I was partnered by Gary Palmer for the duration of the competition. We didn't do very well. England never did very well, to be perfectly honest. We've never done very well, but there are sound reasons for that. We went through the process and very, very much enjoyed it. And I thought, I rather like this. I've never done it before, but now that I've dipped my toe into it, I want some more.
Yeah. So
the following year, we were due to fish in France. And I think that was the first year we held trials. We held trials on Langorse Lake, and I got into the squad on merit this time, because I came through the trials. I did very well, actually, and I got into the squad easily. Interestingly, a lot of people had complained that the first squad had been picked by, if you like, invitation. But when we held trials, it was almost exactly the same squad for the second year, because they were the people who'd done the best in the trials.
Yeah.
I think there was just one difference. So we went through it all again in France. Now, we did a little bit better in France. We came 9th, and it was held on Lac Bourget, which is absolutely stunning water. If ever you get the chance to fish Lac Bourget, then please do so. The secret, actually, little secret for you, any tench fishermen out there, the place is crawling with double-figure tench.
Really?
Massive tench all over the place. But Lac Bourget was very enjoyable indeed. But we were dogged by terrible problems. One of the squad had to drop out shortly before the competition, and he was going to be taking his boat, so it left us a boat down. Another member of the squad said, well, we're now short of a boat, so I'm going to buy one. And he'd never bought a boat before. So he bought this boat at like 2 weeks' notice. And, of course, it had all kinds of problems. So Ricky Cooper bought this boat. He'd never bought a boat before. He trailered it across France before he even got there, both of the tyres on the trailer were shredded.
Yeah.
Then he had to buy new tyres en route. He got it on the water. It was leaking. The engine packed in.
No.
One of the stewards sat on one of the seats and it snapped in two, and he refused to get back on it. But unfortunately, Ricky bought the bolt in haste, and we just had to make do with it. Meanwhile, we had terrible problems with our manager, who fell gravely ill, and very life-threateningly ill. And he was bravely trying his best to manage the team when he was in such a condition that he should never have been even there. And fortunately, my wife Claire and just a moment, and Caroline Edmonds were both there, and they took him to hospital. And the situation was so serious that they lay him on a slab and immediately started to debate whether or not they should cut his leg off. You might or might not want to cut this out. It's up to you.
I was thinking, yeah.
But the big point was, the big issue before they could do any treatment at all was, is he insured and who's going to pay?
Oh, good God. Yeah.
So they didn't actually treat him until they worked out whether or not he was insured and whether they were going to be paid. And he lay there for 2 hours on a trolley with nothing happening. Meanwhile, I was out on the water trying to fish in the World Championships, and I was getting phone calls. Have we got insurance? Well, yes, we've got Angling Trust insurance. Can you get the Angling Trust to ring this hospital? So I'm ringing England whilst trying to catch fish in the World Championships. Can't find anybody in the Angling Trust. And eventually the person I got to speak to was Dilip Sarkar, who was not in that department, but I told him about our terrible problems, and he said, leave it with me. And he managed to get in touch eventually with the insurance company. They rang the hospital, and the manager was treated, but we had to come home without him. He was left behind in hospital in France for 2 weeks, very seriously ill. So France was pretty tricky, but we came ninth, and it was a difficult, very difficult competition. The next competition we had the following year was in Estonia, and a number of things happened in Estonia, some of which I'll not go into in great detail. But the biggest problem with the Estonian competition was that the water was awful. It was too small. It was around 400 acres, which might sound big, but when you've got 60 boats all competing, 400 acres is actually quite small.
Yeah.
It had a very poor stock of fish. It was a lake that was fished for the pot by everybody, and the size limits that we had to adhere to were the national size limits. So basically, I think the size limit on perch was 23 centimetres. So the locals were allowed to catch and take perch of over 23 centimetres, and the only fish that we could count in the competition were perch of over 23 centimetres. So you would catch lots and lots of perch up to 22 centimetres and nothing over,
Yeah.
because they'd all been taken for the pot. The pike, the same. We couldn't catch decent pike because they'd all been taken for the pot. 4 days fishing, 60 of the best lure anglers in the world, and the biggest fish caught was a 3.5-pound jack. That's how bad the fishing was. I didn't fish. I dropped myself I was captain of the team then, and I dropped myself on the first day's fishing because I'm more of a big fish, big lure angler. And we had people in the squad who were much better than me at catching the small fish. So I thought, well, it only makes sense for me to drop myself, which I did. But unfortunately, they didn't do very well. And after the first day, the squad had only caught one fish. But other squads were in a similar position. Some of them had caught no fish. It was so poor. So I dropped 2 of the team members and put myself and someone else in. And I actually managed to catch 8 perch. on the second day, which moved us up the pecking order a little bit. But unfortunately, nobody else in the team caught anything, so we didn't do very well in Estonia. And then the last year I fished was again back to Ireland, but this time it was in Southern Ireland, Loch Ree, which is a water I'd never fished before, but I absolutely loved it. Beautiful, big, open water, and very much the kind of water that I do well at. I did badly, but then we all did. I did do okay on the second day. I caught a couple of nice pike and a good bag of perch, and our boat came in 10th position on the second day. But we'd done so badly on the first day that we didn't move up. That was the last time I ever fished for England, and although it was always a team event with prizes for the team and prizes for the pair, there was an individual angler ranking, world ranking, and at the end of that event, I'd made it up to 8th in the world, which I thought was rather good actually. And slowly, since then, I've dropped down the rankings, and I've probably dropped off the end of it now because I've not fished in the World Championship. But I did make it to 8th in the world, so I was very pleased with that.
Well, that's all you can do, isn't it? That's great. But you took on a role as assistant team manager, didn't you, as well?
Well, we didn't fish for a year because it was in Russia. The Angling Trust said to us, well, we're not sure that our insurance is going to be able to cover you in Russia. So we ummed and ahed about it. We didn't put a team up. And then the next year, we were determined to host the event in this country on Rutland water. And I had actually had a dual role. I was no longer fishing, and that's right. I mean, it's not right to have old men in the team. You want young people in the team. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I could fish for England again, I would dearly love to. But if I was offered the chance, I would turn it down, because there's no point in having a team full of old men. You've got to have some young blood. So the event was to be fished on Rutland water. Steve Collett was selected as team manager, and he asked me to be his deputy, which I agreed to. But I also worked very closely with the Angling Trust staff, because basically I was the only person in the country who knew how the event ran, because I'd been to 4 myself. So we held the event at Rutland water. I have to say, in terms of the organisation of the event, it went very, very well indeed. And in fact, we were commended by FIPS, who were the world governing body, with the way the event was run. It went very well. We had the most atrocious weather you can imagine. The wind was so strong, very, very strong. I think it was 27, 28 mile an hour winds. The winds were so strong that normally the staff at Rutland wouldn't have allowed us to go out. But what they did, they made some areas of the reservoir out of bounds. They said, this is going to be too rough here, you can't go there. Which, of course, completely mucks up your plans if you're intending to fish there. They also, good on them, like they had somebody out on their launch all the time, looking after the anglers to make sure nobody got into trouble. So there was extra safety precautions put in place. And things, thankfully, nobody got into too much trouble. I do recall on the second day, when the wind turned round to the north, most of these guys who fish in the World Championships live in warmer climates, the Americans, particularly the South Africans. One of the South Africans, we think, was starting to suffer from exposure.
That's in October, isn't it?
That was in October.
Yeah.
It was bitterly cold. The temperature between the 2 days dropped by something like 20 degrees.
I was fishing on the Saturday, and we're just exploring on a fen drain, me and a pal. We completely blanked, but I sat there and I said, oh, at least I'm not sitting on Rutland in all this. They've got the World Championships today. The wind was incredible, and I thought, there's a big possibility here they might have to postpone the event because it got that windy. But
well, it was touch and go. It was very much touch and go, but we actually went through it. The wind on the second day was not quite as strong, but it had swung round to the north, and as I say, it's 20 degrees colder.
Wow.
It was biting cold wind. It was also, I think there was a bit of rain on the second day, heavy cloud as well. Anyway, again, England didn't do well. So that's 5 World Championships we've been in. 9th is the highest we've come. We haven't done particularly well. But there are sound reasons for this. Boat fishing in this country is not easy to do. Where you live, Andy, I bet you can't think of anywhere within an hour's drive where you could put your own boat on a river and fish.
Well, I have, apart from where I live now, but in the past I've had to buy boats that I could put on my roof rack and launch them down the bank. But I could.
That's right.
I had a lovely aluminium boat that I used to take to Norfolk Broads. There's no way I could use that on a fen drain because I can't get the damn thing in and out. But this is lack of slipways.
We have. If you go to say Ireland and fish one of the big waters, I mentioned Loch Ree. Fish Loch Ree. If you go drive around Loch Ree, all around Loch Ree there are fabulous, beautiful slipways with free parking, free toilet facilities. Sometimes there's a little cafe or something there as well at the slipway. They're free to use, and you don't even have to pay a license to put your boat on these places. They've all been paid for by European money. That's our money. And yet, if you go to, say, Windermere, and you want to put your boat on, well, you can put it on if you want to put it on between 9 to 5, office hours. You've got to pay to use the slipway and pay 15 quid a day to park your car. And that's the way it is for us. If you go to France and fish Lac Bourget, which I mentioned earlier, beautiful slipways, free parking, free facilities all the way around. And that's the case in a lot of European countries. But in this country, actually just putting your boat on the water is difficult and expensive. Then you've got to consider, if you want to motor from one end of your river to the next, you can only do it at 5 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And even on waters that are like Windermere, the speed limit is 10 miles an hour. If you go to Scotland, even in Scotland, things are changing. There are big areas on Loch Lomond where you're restricted to 7 miles an hour. And I'm talking thousands of acres, 7 miles an hour. If you go on Lac Bourget or Loch Ree, you can go as fast as you like.
Yeah.
So that influences the type of boats that we use. I remember speaking to the German captain coming back from Ireland. He was on the same ferry as us. And he has a fabulous big boat with a 250 horse engine on it. And he can be from one end of Loch Ree to the other in 20 minutes.
Well, if you look
it would take me out.
Look behind me now. Just say to everybody on air, look at the size of those engines you can see.
Yeah, a 6 horse, a 5 horse, and I can't see the other one.
3.5.
3.5. There you go.
We've got 3.5, 4, and a 6. And there's no point having anything bigger because I can't use them.
You can't use them.
No.
You can't use them. So there is no investment in angling boats in this country because of the restrictions that we have to put up with.
Yeah.
We can't launch, and when we can launch, we can't use a decent boat.
No.
So nobody invests.
Yeah.
So there are very, very few people in this country with proper, fully equipped lure fishing boats. Whereas if you go to France or Holland or Germany, there are thousands of them everywhere. So the pool of people that we're picking from in this country is very, very small, and their relative experience is much smaller than the continental adversaries.
Yeah.
And make no mistake, these guys from Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, they are very, very good indeed. It's been noticeable that the past 3 years, America has joined in with the Phipps World Championship. Now, America has a big reputation for sport fishing and lure fishing in particular. And you would think the Americans would do very well indeed, and they're coming down at the bottom next to England. Because these guys in Poland, Polish, the Lithuanians, they are all, the Ukrainians in particular, are fantastic anglers. Because they get the opportunity to boat fish on big waters with good quality equipment all the time.
Yeah.
We just don't.
No, you're quite right. And it's an eye-opener because we know this because it's how we started fishing together. we have a ridiculous amount of equipment that we have to make transportable, don't we, between boats? So we have we have electric bow mounts and the batteries that go with it. We have our side imaging units, our fish finders, the whole caboodle that have to be transportable. I mean, for me and you, we must lose 3 pounds in body weight by the time we've gone up and down the ramps with our engines and batteries.
It's no fun, is it?
No, it's not.
It's no fun. It's no fun when you're 63.
We did very well last summer looking after me, but and then we can only get out, like you said, during office hours. It's crazy. So you have a limited time on the water. You spend a lot of money to get on the water. Your fishing time's curtailed by how long you can fish for. So we're always playing catch up because we never get a chance to actually experiment that much because we actually want to catch something when we're there. So we go to our go-to methods. And then obviously when that's not working so well, or if it's working really well, that's the time we should be refining it further. But we just don't have the time to do it. It's a massive handicap. And like you're saying, for the England team, it's going to be a major problem for them for the foreseeable future.
Well, after the Rutland events, I decided it was time for me to hang my rods up in that respect. And I've had a good run, a total of 6 years in the England squad one way or another. I've very, very much enjoyed it. I've made a lot of good friends. I've learned a huge amount, and it's something I'm so pleased that I did. But I'm in my 60s now, and it's very much, I think, that side of it is a young man's sport. I think competition fishing favours younger people. It's hard to describe, but it's all action. It's all busy. You've got to be thinking all the time, working all the time, re-rigging, changing that approach. It's quite stressful, and you wouldn't believe. I mean, when you're in a competition, you're out there for 6 hours. It seems to go in about 5 minutes. It flies. It goes so fast.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed doing it. I'm very glad I did it, but it became time for me to call it a day.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. The other thing I noticed, because obviously we dipped our toes in last year with the World Predator Classic, and obviously we probably think it's going to be cancelled for this year. So next year we'll be back out as the gruesome twosome or the dynamic duo, whichever way we decide to go. And the thing that I really enjoyed about dipping my toes in last season with all this was the lure angling side is far more sociable than hardcore pike fishing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it's a big thing I notice. Obviously, when you're in the depths of your throes of your proper piking, your old school piking, people don't talk to each other. Everything's cloak and dagger, and I know why. But this was beautiful. I love just talking to people, and you can have a proper discussion, and everybody was very open, and it just seemed a nice sociable thing to do, but still on the predator front. So that was great. And also I've noticed this season doing the podcast, I've been to a few matches where Alex has been competing, and the match angling scene, I forgot, is a very sociable event as well. The match anglers,
yes,
they're great. They have a lot of banter between each other, and I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier about angling not helping itself. You can get too sucked into one discipline, and it's to your own detriment because there's so much to be gained from doing different parts of the sport, like you found out with the lure fishing side of England.
Well, yes, you're right. There's an old saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none," and that's probably true. So if you want to become very good at something, you need to focus on it. That's without question. That's the case. So you can't be very good at competition lure fishing and carp fishing and sea fishing and all these other things. You just can't be. But there's nothing wrong with having your main focus on something like, for instance, competition lure fishing, and then dabbling in other things. Now, I'm getting on a bit now, and over the years I've dabbled in lots of things, but now and again I've decided to zoom into something, really focus on something. For a long time it was, say, tench fishing, or for a period it would be lure fishing for pike, and again for a period it was competition fishing. All things that in the end I feel I've done myself credit with, I've enjoyed, but it became time for me to move on and try something new.
Yeah, that's good, just to freshen it up. Yeah, it's good. I'm quite similar. No, I lie. I'm not quite similar at all. I do mine in months. I fly fish for pike May and June, and then I have a break because the water temperature gets too high, and then I'll start lure fishing for the predators again September time, October, and then I really enjoy my bait fishing still, and I kind of like to completely knacker myself on the boat's lure fishing. So I get to the end of November and I've kind of had enough of standing up there in the wind and the rain and being battered. So going back behind the rods for bait fishing is quite a nice, relaxing way of seeing the winter out. But it's nice to have the variety throughout the year to keep you going, and you have little targets within it. So it's all good. Eric, we've been talking for ages, and we could continue talking because I want to just pick your brains, and I'm going to use otters as the generic title here. But first of all, with your chairperson title of Angling Trust and Freshwater Specialist Advisory Group, I know you've done a lot of work within that. Do you want to explain to the listeners what that entails?
Well, the ATSFAG, as it's called, is basically a group of people who represent the single species organisations in angling, specimen anglers, if you like. People like the Tench Fishers and the British Carp Study Group and so on, Pike Anglers Club. And we haven't had a meeting for a while, but the main thrust of it is that to make sure they get a representation within the Angling Trust, so to make sure these single species groups and their feelings and thoughts are taken through towards the Angling Trust. So we would have a meeting, and then I, twice a year, go to a meeting called the Freshwater Committee with the Angling Trust, which also draws in the chair people of the different Angling Trust regions. We're all volunteers. None of us are paid, not paid by the Angling Trust at all.
Yeah.
And we basically discuss issues that are affecting angling in our own area or our own sort of type of angling, or in my case, the specialist anglers. You mentioned the word otters there. Otters have featured very highly in our discussions in the specialist group. For a long time, they were the dominant subject. Now, my take on otters is probably, you see, it's very difficult with otters to walk a sensible line. Most people with otters fall very heavily into one of two camps. One being that they are a natural species that belong in our waterways and must be protected at all costs, and the other being that they are detrimental to some kinds of angling and they've got to be shot. And it's very difficult to find anybody who is anywhere in between those two things. I try to position myself in between those two things because I try to walk a sensible middle line. But it just means that the people at either end hate me.
So everybody hates you.
Yeah, so it's a very lonely route.
It's a lonely route.
My take on otters is this: otters are a natural part of our waterscape. They have been in this country since the Ice Age, which is actually longer than we've had people in this country. They're here to stay. Otters were wiped out back in the middle of the last century, not by hunting, as some people will tell you. They were not wiped out by hunting. They were wiped out by chemicals used on the land, particularly a chemical called dieldrin. Dieldrin was banned in the 1980s because it was recognised that it was finding its way into the animal food chain. When these things work up to the apex predator, the apex predator gets wiped out. So otters were basically almost completely wiped out in England. They still existed in Wales, still existed in Scotland, and there was also a small population in the West Country. When dieldrin was banned, slowly the otters started to come back. This return was bolstered by a breeding programme by what was then the Otter Trust, which has been disbanded. And the Otter Trust released 117 captive bred animals, the last one being released in 1999. There is no proof anywhere of captive bred animals being released after 1999. despite the fact that all over the internet people will tell you that they're being released on my water, they're being released just up the road. Show me the evidence is what I say, because there is no evidence and I don't believe it's happening. I've been quoted as saying that there is no otter problem, and that's not true. I've never ever said that. There is absolutely a problem with otters. And the problem otters bring with them is that they are going to change our fishing. There is no question about that. They are going to change our fishing. And what's upsetting angling, a lot of anglers, is that they don't like that change. Now, there will be people out there who will tell you that otters are going to completely wipe out angling in certain areas, and they're not going to wipe out angling. Otters do seem to be causing a real problem, particularly with carp and with barbel. With carp, if they get into a carp water, an otter can completely wipe out the stock. They seem to find carp very easy to catch, and they will take even the biggest carp. Even 50-pound carp have been killed by an otter. The otter will catch the fish, drag it to the bank, rip its throat out, usually just eat some of the vital organs and leave the rest. A lot of people say, well, they're such wasteful animals, but in all honesty, could you eat 50 pounds of carp as a sitting? I don't think I could, and certainly an otter couldn't. So that's a function of the size of the carp, really. It's not that they're gratuitously wasteful, they just can't eat more than a couple of pounds of flesh. A lot of carp fisheries are now fenced, and that is providing adequate protection for the carp. Some carp fisheries cannot be fenced because of the way the land lies, maybe because the landowner won't allow fencing, or there might be a myriad reasons, but some fisheries cannot be fenced. In that case, the otters are going to cause damage, and that is probably inevitable. Now, if we go down a route of shooting otters, then the likelihood is our sport will get such a bad name and such a bad reputation with the general public that our sport will suffer greatly. The Angling Trust have a stance on otters. I would encourage anybody to read the Angling Trust's page on otters. There's quite a lot of information there. And despite what people think, the Angling Trust have done more than anyone else to mitigate against the problems of otters. The Angling Trust have released, I think it's £700,000 worth of funds from the Angling Improvement Fund to pay for otter fencing. That's anybody who wanted it and asked for it. All right, there was a pecking order, but they released these funds as best they could. They've had the fisheries management advisors trained in otter trapping. So if an otter gets into a fenced fishery, the fisheries management advisor can net the otter, trap the otter and get it out again. The Angling Trust have done quite a lot. And of course, these advisors are there to advise as well, and they will advise on how to mitigate against the effects of otters. At the end of the day, we can only do so much, and otters will change angling, but they will not be the death of angling. Some waters that cannot be fenced, frankly, if the otters keep coming back and taking the stock of carp, then don't stock carp.
Yeah.
Stock another species that the otters don't have such an impact on. If you've got all of your biomass concentrated down into a dozen huge carp, then an otter only needs to eat a dozen times and your water's finished.
Yeah.
If your biomass is spread out to 10,000 roach, then the otters are not going to make much of an impression. You're not even going to know they're there. So consider different uses for fisheries where the otters are a particular problem. I do know that on some rivers, some people will tell you that barbel fishing is finished in this country because of otters. And yet, at the same time, I'm seeing river records, barbel river records, being broken year after year. In the past 3 or 4 years, there must have been more barbel river records broken than in the previous 50. It seems that there's been big barbel caught in so many rivers. you and I were having a conversation of this. I think the Bristol Avon, there was recently a £17 barbel caught.
That's what you were telling me, 2 days ago.
A new river record.
Yeah.
A very good friend of mine had a near 20 pounder from the Hampshire Avon last year. So these fish have not been eaten by otters. They're living alongside otters, and it is possible for that to happen. What is happening, I don't deny, in some areas, the barbel population is being impacted very severely by otters. There's no question about that. And again, if barbel are a particularly easy target for otters, we don't have to restock with barbel. Otters don't seem to be able to eat chub so easily. They don't seem to go for that many roach. They don't seem to go for various other species. So why should we keep on punishing ourselves by continually stocking those fish that the otters find easy to eat?
Yeah.
It's foolish. I would say accept the fact that otters are going to change our sport and learn to work with it rather than against it. If people carry, there was a guy just recently was prosecuted for shooting an otter down in the south. He was foolish enough to shoot an otter in front of other people. I've been doing some digging about this. The guy shot the otter last July. Already, that water has another otter on it. Because when you create a hole in the ecosystem, nature doesn't allow that, and something else just drops in. So how many otters are we going to shoot? Because you shoot an otter, it creates a hole, another otter moves in, you shoot another otter. There's been a massive public outcry over badger culling. And otters are a lot more cuddly and a lot rarer than badgers. So what's going to happen if we start shooting otters? Angling's going to suffer badly.
Yeah. Eric, you're brilliant, really, to talk to, because you always have a viewpoint that when I discuss things with you, I kind of sit there and go, I totally get it. Because I'm very anti-otter. But you're right what you're saying. If you keep hammering against, if you keep banging your head against the door, nothing's going to happen. And I think you're right what you're saying. We're not going to. The otters have been re-established. They are back. We can't stop that. And they were here for an awful long time before mankind was here. So they are. Yeah. They have a place here. I didn't like the way. I mean, I was fishing on the Thurn 15 years ago. Probably 12 to 15 years ago, and suddenly there was just this massive influx of otters. So I might disagree with you slightly. I think there was some kind of man-made introduction somewhere along the lines. I have no evidence, no data, but I just saw suddenly all these otters were appearing from nowhere in threes and fours.
When was that, Andy? When was that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, and it was after 2000. It must have been about 2005, 6, 7 time.
It's highly unlikely that, in fact, I don't believe that these were captive bred otters unless they were from the 1990s introductions.
Yeah,
and I have to say that those introductions were done insensitively. Anglers were not consulted at all, and they should have been consulted. But there's no point in us harking back over what happened 20 years ago now. Those people who did that, a lot of them actually are dead.
Well, that's why I like talking to you about this, because what you say there is really good. For us to move forward, there is no point whinging about something that's happened in the past. We have to now move forward with it, and you're exactly right. And I like the way you kind of take that on board and you go, we have to work with the problem rather than keep banging our head against a brick wall. And what you're saying is, this is the issue now. Let's find a way in which we can evolve with it. And I think, I hate to say it, but I think you're right again. I think this is the way we have to go with all this. And you are the voice of reason with it as well, because you don't like to sit comfortably in one kind of strong opinion. You always look for the common sense approach with this. And I think on several of our discussions today, you've actually said the same. You're always coming from it from a common sense point of view. And it's just really refreshing to hear someone have a different opinion.
Well, when it comes to otters, Andy, I liken it to going on a journey. If you're going on a journey, then there are 3 things that you need to establish before you go. You need to establish where you are, that is where you're setting out from. You need to establish where you want to be, That is what your end point is. And you need to establish how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
So if we're going out on a journey where I'm starting out in St Helens, I want to go to Glasgow and I'm going to go on the train. Simple enough. With otters, people never bother with point number 1 or point number 2. They jump to point number 3. We don't know where we are with otters. We haven't established where we want to be with otters. Let's just shoot them. And that is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Yeah. And there's a logical thought process behind this and actually working out a planned approach so we can get there. You're exactly right. Yeah. Eric, we have discussed a lot, and we will discuss some more when I press stop on the record button as well. Is there anything else you would like to talk about before we bring this to an end?
There's probably a million things I'd like to talk about, but I'm starting to get a sore throat.
Yeah, I know. It's absolutely brilliant. For the listeners out there, what we've done, I've had to phone Eric back about 2 or 3 times because the line keeps doing very strange things. And the last section of recording, I got that dodgy pinging in my ear again, like I had with Jamie. So hopefully the audio comes out okay. But from podcast perspective, Eric, I just would like to say it's an absolute pleasure to have you on because you are, I know you're a friend of mine, but I'm being honest now, you are just a breath of fresh air when it comes to angling. You have so many opinions that are very much taking everybody's view on board and trying to work out a sensible approach to it. I just think if people just started listening to Eric Edwards, life would be far easier.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, on that note, I'm going to press stop on the record button.
All right, mate. Nice to talk to you.
For those that are interested, we've started doing a vlog. So we'll be on number 3, I believe, or maybe even number 4 by the time the podcast comes out. And obviously, the first couple of vlogs, they lacked, to be honest, a bit of content. And that's my fault, really, because I was just trying to get content in. And it's not easy trying to balance everything. But what we're trying to do is, Alex, I think we're going to try and get some pole float videos done with you tomorrow or the next couple of days. Yep. So
definitely. Yeah.
If we're going to start off with different pole floats, different types of pole floats, and what types of pole floats you'd use on different waters, that would be cool.
Yeah.
If we can get the quality good enough, we'll do some rigging of the pole floats as well. But not on
if we can.
Not on the same vlog, but we'll do separate vlogs.
So
we'll do a vlog on pole floats, and then if we can do another one on how to rig them for different waters, that would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do one on the different types of swim feeders.
Yeah,
because that's amazing how many different types of swim feeders are available now. And
different setups and when you'd perhaps use certain ones over others.
Yeah, exactly. If we can get the video quality sorted, then we'll do different types of rigs for those as well. But the pole floats and the feeders on their own, I think, will be pretty straightforward. It's just, obviously, we're playing around with FaceTime and different types of videoing techniques in this period of isolation, and it depends on the I think it depends on the time of day that we're finding out, isn't it, and how strong the internet coverage is, because when I phone, for example, Joe in America in the evening, it's about 9 o'clock at night here, it's perfect. Well, it's perfect as FaceTime can be. Yeah, we tried it about half an hour ago and it was pants, wasn't it? So we'll just have to
it was.
We'll just have to see what we can do. But if we can get the vlogs going, that'll be really good as well. Right, Alex, is there anything else you would like to add to finish this week's podcast off?
No, not really, mate. I mean, I've sort of had my head down and motoring through doing what I've been doing, but just really everyone stay indoors. I know we all want to go outside and have a go at fishing, but it's just not the time and place, is it, at the minute? So I'm sure there'll be plenty of time, hopefully September, I don't know, whenever, and we can get on the bank again.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, I think the quicker everybody just toes the party line and stays indoors, the quicker the pandemic can get sorted and the quicker we can get back out again.
Yeah.
I don't understand how this is so difficult for some people to get into their heads. But I reckon 4/5 of the population are all team players and know exactly what to do. and I reckon about 1/5 are a bit, I don't know, don't wish to be rude, but a bit brain dead really and selfish and just want to do what they want to do, which hinders everybody else. But let's see. So the message is stay home and then let's support the NHS and we'll get through this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. Okay, I think also we'd like to thank everyone for supporting Tackle and Baits, because you have been, well, you've been in it. Is it? I can say it from my point of view because I struggle to get in contact with you because you're so busy. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's been really positive. So yeah, and if anyone does want any hooks, line, or anything, or chat about anything, just if they're making rigs and they're not sure what to use or what floats or whatever, just give me a ring and I'll advise as best I can. Really.
Well, that's very generous of you. And also, what I would say to people is, when we get back to normality, that offer won't be on the table because you'll be too busy in the shop as well, won't you?
Well, we'll see. No, I'm always here. People come and see me and ask me my advice, and that's what I'm here for. So, if I'll try and make time if I can to answer or pick the. If you ring me, I will speak to you. So
cool. Well, that just shows that such a generous person you are. And also, I'd like to thank Eric Edwards as well. He's a fantastic man, and he's well worth listening to. And we could do worse than heed his wise words on all things fishing related. Right, Alex, I'm going to bring this to an end. This has been Tales from the Tackle Shop, a Fenland Fishing TV production.